John Morrison sat alone in his small apartment in Geneva when the message arrived. The afternoon sun came through the window and made patterns on his desk. He was 73 years old. His hair had turned white many years ago. His hands were spotted with age. He had been retired for 5 years now, and he spent most of his days reading old books and drinking tea. The messenger was not human. It stood at his door, nearly 8 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. A Velthari. Morrison had met many Velthari during his years as a diplomat. They were traders and couriers, known throughout the galaxy for their speed and their silence. This one held a small crystal in its 4-fingered hand. "John Morrison," the Velthari said. Its voice was like wind through dry leaves. "You are summoned." Morrison took the crystal. It was warm in his palm. He pressed his thumb against its surface, and words appeared in the air above it. Words in the formal script of the Galactic Council. He read them twice, then he read them again. "There must be a mistake," he said. The Velthari did not answer. It simply turned and walked away, its long legs carrying it down the hallway and out of sight. Morrison stood in his doorway for a long time, holding the crystal, feeling its warmth fade slowly in his hand. The summons was real. The Galactic Council wanted him to appear before them on Nexus Prime. Not as part of a human delegation, not as an observer, alone. The summons gave no reason. It simply demanded his presence within 10 standard days. Morrison closed his door and sat down heavily in his chair. His tea had gone cold. He did not notice. 40 years. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for 40 years. Morrison remembered the early days. He had been a young man then, barely 30, working for the United Nations when the first alien ships appeared in Earth's sky. He remembered the fear. He remembered the wonder. He remembered how small he had felt, standing on a rooftop in New York, watching vessels the size of mountains drift through the clouds. The aliens had not come to conquer. They had come to categorize. Earth was simply another world to be added to their records. Humanity was simply another species to be noted and filed away. The Galactic Council sent representatives to explain the rules. Humanity could trade. Humanity could travel. Humanity could learn. But humanity could not vote. Humanity could not speak in the council chambers. Humanity was too young, too primitive, too new. Observer status. That was what they called it. Humans could watch. Humans could listen. Humans could not participate. Morrison had spent his entire career trying to change that. He had traveled to 100 worlds. He had learned to speak 6 alien languages. He had negotiated trade agreements and cultural exchanges and scientific partnerships. He had smiled at beings who looked at him like he was an insect. He had bowed to creatures who considered his entire species to be little more than clever animals. And in the end, nothing had changed. Humanity was still at the bottom, still ignored, still dismissed. Morrison looked at the crystal again. Why him? Why now? He was retired. He had no official position. He was just an old man who had spent his life talking to aliens who did not want to listen. He made some calls. The United Nations knew nothing. The Human Stellar Authority knew nothing. Everyone he contacted was as confused as he was. The summons had come through official channels, verified by 3 separate authentication protocols. It was real. It was valid. And it was addressed to him specifically. His daughter called him that evening. She lived on Mars now, working as an engineer in the terraforming project. Her face appeared on his wall screen, worried and tired. "Dad, what is this about? I heard you received a council summons." "News travels fast. Are you in trouble? Did something happen?" Morrison shook his head. "I do not know, Sarah. I truly do not know. Maybe you should not go. Let them send someone else. Someone younger. They asked for me. They asked for me by name. If I refuse, it could make things worse for everyone." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I do not like this." "Neither do I." He left Earth 3 days later. A human transport took him to the relay station at Jupiter. From there, a Kethrani cargo vessel carried him across the vast emptiness between stars. The Kethrani were a merchant race, interested only in profit, indifferent to politics. They gave Morrison a small cabin and left him alone. The journey took 6 days. Morrison spent most of that time in his cabin, reading and thinking. He reviewed everything he knew about the current state of galactic politics. The Dominari were expanding their influence in the outer regions. The Velthari were struggling with some kind of internal crisis. The Kathrani were playing all sides against each other, as they always did. The other 9 council races had their own concerns, their own conflicts, their own ancient grudges. And humanity? Humanity was a footnote, a minor species on a minor world, too weak to threaten anyone, too new to matter. The cargo vessel dropped Morrison at a transfer station in neutral space. From there, he took a passenger liner to Nexus Prime. The liner was crowded with beings from a dozen different species. Morrison found a seat near the back and watched them. A Velthari family occupied one section, their children playing some kind of game with floating lights. A group of Dominari warriors sat in rigid formation, their scaled bodies covered in ceremonial armor. A Kathrani merchant argued with a member of a species Morrison did not recognize, their translator devices struggling to keep up with the rapid exchange. None of them looked at Morrison. None of them acknowledged his presence. He was invisible to them. Just another human? Just another primitive. The liner arrived at Nexus Prime on the 9th day. Morrison gathered his small bag and joined the crowd moving toward the exit. The station was enormous, a vast sphere of metal and glass hanging in orbit around a dead star. The Galactic Council had built it 10,000 years ago, a neutral ground where all species could meet and talk and make their deals. Morrison had been here before, many times. He knew the wide corridors and the high ceilings and the endless crowds of aliens going about their business. He knew the smell of recycled air and strange foods and 100 different biologies mixing together. He knew the sound of 1,000 languages being spoken at once, the translator implant in his ear turning them all into something he could understand. But something was different this time. The corridors were not crowded. They were nearly empty. The beings he passed did not ignore him. They watched him. A Kathrani merchant, one of the most indifferent species in the galaxy, actually stopped what it was doing to stare at Morrison as he walked by. A group of Velthari couriers fell silent as he approached, their color-shifting scales going pale. Morrison kept walking. He did not let his confusion show on his face. Decades of diplomatic training had taught him to keep his expressions neutral, but inside his heart was beating faster. Something had happened, something big, and somehow it involved him. He reached the entrance to the council sector and found it guarded by Dominari soldiers. Their massive bodies blocked the doorway, their forearms holding weapons that could vaporize a human in an instant. Morrison presented his summons crystal. The lead soldier examined it for a long moment, then stepped aside without a word. The council sector was even more empty than the main corridors. Morrison's footsteps echoed on the polished floor. He passed through checkpoints and security stations, each one manned by beings who looked at him with expressions he could not read. Finally, he reached the antechamber outside the grand chamber itself. A protocol officer was waiting for him there. It was a member of a species called the Synthera, beings made of living crystal who had served as neutral administrators for the council since before human civilization began. "John Morrison of Earth," the Synthera said. Its voice was like chimes in the wind. "You are expected. The council will see you shortly. Can you tell me what this is about?" The Synthera's crystalline face showed no expression. "You will learn soon enough." Morrison sat down on one of the benches that lined the antechamber walls. He was alone. The silence pressed against him. Through the massive doors at the far end of the room, he could hear nothing. The grand chamber was designed to be completely soundproof. He waited. Minutes passed. An hour. More. Finally, the doors began to open. Light spilled out from the chamber beyond, bright and harsh. Morrison stood up and straightened his jacket. He was wearing his old diplomatic uniform, the same one he had worn to 100 meetings and negotiations over the years. It felt right to wear it now. He walked toward the light, toward the doors, toward whatever waited for him inside. The galaxy was watching. He could feel it. Every species, every world, every being who had ever dismissed humanity as primitive and irrelevant was now paying attention. They were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. John Morrison entered the grand chamber alone, and behind him the doors closed with a sound like thunder. The Grand Chamber was the largest enclosed space Morrison had ever seen. The ceiling rose so high that clouds actually formed near the top, drifting slowly in the artificial air currents. The walls curved upward and inward, covered with screens that displayed the symbols of 1,000-member worlds. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the chamber with a soft golden glow. At the far end of the chamber, raised on platforms of varying heights, sat the 12 council seats. Each seat was designed for a different species. The Dominari chair was massive, built to hold a being 12 feet tall and weighing over 1,000 pounds. The Velthari seat was more like a pool, filled with the warm liquid their kind preferred. The Kethrani throne was covered in precious metals and gems, reflecting their obsession with wealth. All 12 seats were occupied. Morrison felt his stomach tighten. In his 40 years of dealing with the council, he had never seen all 12 seats filled at once. The last time that had happened was during the Void War, nearly 3 centuries ago. The elder races only gathered in full assembly for matters of existential importance. Between Morrison and the council seats stretched the gallery. It was designed to hold 10,000 observers. Today it held more. Beings were standing in the aisles, crowded against the walls, packed into every available space. Morrison recognized representatives from species he had dealt with over the years. He saw others he had never encountered before. Every world, every faction, every power in the known galaxy had sent someone to watch. And at the center of it all, alone on the petitioner's platform, stood a single human. Morrison walked toward the platform. His footsteps made no sound on the soft floor. The silence in the chamber was complete. 10,000 beings watched him, and not one of them made a noise. He reached the platform and climbed the 3 steps to its top. The platform was raised just enough to let him see over the crowd, but not enough to put him on level with the council. The message was clear. He was here to be judged, not to judge. A voice boomed through the chamber, translated simultaneously into Morrison's ear. "This assembly is called to order." The speaker was High Arbiter Zethros of the Dominari. He was ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species. His scales faded to a pale gray, his forearms thin with age. But his voice was strong, and his eyes were sharp as he looked down at Morrison. "Let the record show that all 12 council seats are present. Let the record show that the petitioner, John Morrison of Earth, has answered his summons. Let the proceedings begin." Morrison kept his face neutral. Petitioner. That was the formal term for someone accused of a crime against the council. Not guest, not witness. Petitioner. Zethros continued, his voice filling the vast chamber. "The species known as humanity stands accused of violating the covenant of bounded warfare. The specific charge is as follows: the deployment of a weapon of unlimited destructive potential in the Kepler 442 system, resulting in the complete destruction of a Dominari military installation and the deaths of 3,000 Dominari personnel." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Morrison felt the weight of 10,000 stares pressing against him. He said nothing. "Evidence will now be presented." A screen flickered to life in the air above the council seats. It showed a star system that Morrison recognized from charts he had studied years ago. Kepler 442, a minor system in a disputed region of space. Humanity had sent a research vessel there 6 months ago to study unusual solar activity. The screen zoomed in on the 4th planet, a rocky world, barely habitable, useful mainly as a way station for ships passing through the region. The Dominari had maintained a small military outpost there for centuries. 12 days ago, Zethros said, this outpost was destroyed. The screen showed what remained of the installation. Nothing. The entire complex had been reduced to a crater of melted rock and ash. The destruction was total. 3 days before the destruction, this vessel was detected entering the system. A new image appeared, a human ship. Morrison recognized it immediately. It was the Curiosity, a research vessel operated by the Human Stellar Authority. He knew its captain personally. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a scientist who had devoted her life to studying stellar phenomena. The ship carried no weapons beyond standard navigation lasers. The vessel remained in the system for 47 hours, Zethros continued. It departed 18 hours before the destruction occurred. Analysis of the destruction pattern indicates the use of an energy weapon of unprecedented power. The spectral signature of this weapon matches no known technology in the Galactic database. Zethros leaned forward, his ancient eyes fixed on Morrison. Humanity is the newest species in the galactic community. Humanity is also the only species whose weapons technology is not fully documented in our records. The Council therefore concludes that humanity has developed a secret weapon capable of destroying entire installations. This is a direct violation of the Covenant of Bounded Warfare, which requires all species to declare their full military capabilities. Morrison stood very still. He understood now. This was not a trial. This was a trap. The Covenant of Bounded Warfare was one of the oldest laws in the galaxy. It had been created after the Void War, when three species nearly destroyed each other with weapons of mass destruction. The Covenant required every species to declare all of their military technology to the Council. Any species that developed secret weapons could be punished severely. In extreme cases, they could be reduced to servitor status, stripped of all rights, and forced to serve the other species. In the worst cases, extinction protocols could be authorized. Someone had destroyed that outpost. Someone had made it look like humanity was responsible. And now the Council had a legal excuse to crush the human species before it could become a threat. The Dominari representative rose from a seat in the gallery. He was younger than Zethros, his scales still dark and strong, his body massive with muscle. His name was Kreth, and Morrison knew him by reputation. A military commander, a hardliner, one of the loudest voices calling for limits on human expansion. The evidence is clear, Kreth declared. Humanity has developed weapons that threaten the entire galaxy. They must be contained before they can use these weapons again. I move that humanity be required to surrender all military assets to Council oversight, pending a full investigation. More voices joined his. A Velthari delegate called for human ships to be confined to their home system. A Kathrani representative demanded that human colonies be placed under Council administration. One by one, the species that had ignored humanity for 40 years suddenly had opinions about what should be done with them. Morrison listened to it all. He watched the faces in the gallery. He saw fear in some of them, greed in others, satisfaction in a few. The elder races had tolerated humanity as long as humans stayed small and quiet. Now they had an excuse to make sure humanity stayed small forever. Zethros raised one of his forearms, and the chamber fell silent. The petitioner has the right to respond to the charges. John Morrison of Earth, do you wish to speak? Morrison looked up at the ancient Dominari. He looked at the 12 council seats, at the 10,000 observers, at the screens still showing the destruction of the outpost. Yes, he said, I wish to speak. Zethros nodded. You may approach the evidence archive. Morrison stepped down from the petitioner's platform and walked toward the center of the chamber. The evidence archive was a pillar of light rising from the floor, containing all the data that had been presented against humanity. He had the right to examine it. He had the right to question it. He reached the archive and placed his hand against its surface. Data flowed around him, images and readings and analysis reports. He studied them in silence for a long moment. Then he began to ask questions. High Arbiter, the records show that the energy signature was detected at 1423 Standard Time. Is this correct? Zethros frowned. It is correct. And the Curiosity entered the system at what time? A pause. 2047 Standard Time. So the energy signature occurred more than 6 hours before the human vessel arrived in the system. Silence. Morrison saw Kreth shift in his seat. Zethros' expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. That is a matter of interpretation, Zethros said. The signature may have been a precursor event. Morrison nodded and continued examining the data. He asked about the spectral analysis. He asked about the debris patterns. He asked 17 more questions, each one small, each one technical, each one seemingly unrelated to the others. And slowly, piece by piece, a different picture began to emerge. The destruction pattern was wrong for an external attack. The spectral signature did not match any human technology. The timing made no sense if the Curiosity was responsible. And buried deep in the data, almost hidden in the flood of information, was a single reading that changed everything. Morrison pulled it up on the main screen for everyone to see. This sensor log was recorded by a Velthari trading post at the edge of the system. It shows a vessel departing the fourth planet 6 hours before the destruction. The vessel's drive signature matches Dominari military specifications. The chamber erupted. Kreth was on his feet, shouting. Other delegates were demanding explanations. The gallery had become a chaos of voices and movement. Zethros called for order, but no one was listening. Morrison stood in the center of it all, calm and still. He had found the crack in their story. Now he needed to break it wide open. The chaos continued for several minutes. Delegates shouted at each other across the gallery. Council members argued among themselves. The orderly assembly that had gathered to condemn humanity had become something close to a riot. Morrison did not move from his position near the evidence archive. He kept his hand on its surface, feeling the pulse of data flowing through it. He waited. Finally, Zethros slammed his massive fist against his seat, and the sound echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap. Slowly, reluctantly, the noise died down. "Order," Zethros growled. "There will be order in this chamber." Kreth was still standing, his dark scales flushed with anger. This is a trick. The human has manipulated the evidence. The Velthari sensor log is clearly a fabrication. A Velthari delegate rose from the gallery. Her scales shifted through shades of blue and green, showing her irritation. The log is authentic. Our systems do not lie. If the human found something in our data, it is because it was there to be found. Then someone planted it there. Someone is working with the humans to undermine this investigation. "You accuse us of conspiracy?" The shouting started again. Morrison watched it unfold. The alliance that had formed against humanity was already cracking. Fear and suspicion were spreading through the chamber like poison. Zethros called for order once more. His voice was tired now, and Morrison noticed something in the old Dominari's eyes. Doubt. Perhaps even worry. "The petitioner will continue his examination of the evidence," Zethros said. "All delegates will remain silent until he is finished." Morrison nodded his thanks and turned back to the archive. He had found one hole in their story. Now he needed to find more. "I would like to request additional data," he said. "Specifically, I want to see the communication logs from the Dominari outpost in the 3 days before its destruction." Kreth stepped forward. "Those logs are classified military information. They have no bearing on this investigation. With respect, they have every bearing. If we are to determine what destroyed the outpost, we need to know what was happening there before the destruction." Zethros considered this. "The request is reasonable. Commander Kreth, release the logs." Kreth's face twisted with anger. But he had no choice. He gestured to one of his aides, and a moment later, new data flowed into the archive. Morrison examined it carefully. The logs showed routine communications for the first 2 days. Supply requests, personnel transfers, weather reports from the planet's surface, normal military operations on a minor outpost. Then on the 3rd day, everything changed. A priority message arrived from Dominari High Command. The contents were encrypted, but the timestamp was clear. 6 hours later, the outpost reported all personnel were evacuating to emergency shelters. 4 hours after that, a Dominari vessel departed the system. 2 hours after that, the outpost was destroyed. Morrison pulled up the relevant entries and displayed them on the main screen. "The evacuation order came before the destruction," he said. "The Dominari knew something was going to happen. They moved their people to safety and sent a ship away from the planet. Then, and only then, did the destruction occur." The chamber was silent now. Every eye was fixed on the screen. "This does not prove what destroyed the outpost," Zethros said carefully. "It only proves that our forces received advance warning." Warning from whom? If humans were responsible, how would the Dominari High Command know to evacuate hours before the attack? No answer came. Morrison reached into his jacket and removed a small data crystal. He had been carrying it since he left Earth, given to him by an old friend at the Human Stellar Authority. At the time, he had not understood why it might be important. Now he did. "I have one more piece of evidence to present," he said. "This crystal contains the complete sensor logs from the research vessel Curiosity. Every reading, every scan, every particle that touched its hull during its time in the Kepler 442 system. He inserted the crystal into the archive. Data flooded the displays. Humans are a paranoid species, Morrison said. We have been treated as primitives and outsiders for 40 years. We have learned not to trust. We have learned to watch, to listen, to record everything, because we never know when we might need proof of what really happened. The Curiosity's logs told a very different story than the one the Council had presented. The research vessel had arrived in the system to study solar flare patterns, just as its mission profile stated. It had conducted its research for 2 days, gathering data on the star's unusual activity. On the 3rd day, its sensors had detected something strange. A Dominari vessel was approaching the 4th planet at high speed. Captain Vasquez ordered her crew to observe but not interfere, Morrison said. They watched as the Dominari vessel entered orbit around the planet. They recorded as it deployed a series of devices toward the surface, and they captured the moment 3 hours later when those devices detonated. The screen showed the destruction from the Curiosity's perspective. A series of bright flashes on the planet's surface, a shock wave spreading outward, and then nothing but a crater where the outpost had been. The Dominari destroyed their own installation, Morrison said. Then they blamed humanity for it. Kreth lunged toward Morrison. 2 Synthera guards materialized between them, their crystalline bodies forming an impassable barrier. Kreth's face was twisted with rage. Lies! This is all lies! The human has fabricated this evidence. The evidence can be verified, Morrison said calmly. Every data point, every sensor reading, every timestamp. Compare it to your own records. Compare it to the Velthari logs. Compare it to anything you want. It will hold up because it is the truth. Zethros raised a hand and the guards escorted Kreth back to his seat. The old Dominari's expression was unreadable. This is a serious accusation, Zethros said. You are claiming that the Dominari military deliberately destroyed one of their own outposts and blamed humanity for the attack. I am not just claiming it, I am proving it. Why? What purpose would such an act serve? Morrison looked around the chamber. 10,000 faces stared back at him. He took a deep breath. For 40 years, humanity has been ignored. We have been dismissed as primitives, as children playing in a galaxy we do not understand. We have posed no threat to anyone, but that is changing. He paused, letting the silence build. Human technology is advancing faster than anyone expected. Our population is growing. Our colonies are expanding. In another 50 years, maybe 100, humanity will be a real power in this galaxy. And some of the elder races do not want that to happen. Kreth was shaking with fury, but he said nothing. This was never about justice, Morrison continued. This was about stopping humanity before we become too strong to stop. Destroy our reputation, take our ships, control our colonies, reduce us to servants. That was the plan. You have no proof of this conspiracy, Zethros said. I have all the proof I need. I have the sensor logs. I have the communication records. I have the testimony of the Curiosity's crew. And I have something else. Morrison reached into the archive and pulled up one final piece of data. Humans have been watching, listening, learning. For 40 years, we have been treated as beneath notice. And in that time, we have gathered information. We know things about this galaxy that the Council does not want known. The screen filled with files. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Intelligence reports, intercepted communications, surveillance data, a map of the galaxy's secrets compiled over 4 decades by a species that everyone had underestimated. I am not here to threaten anyone, Morrison said. I am here to tell the truth. The Dominari destroyed their own outpost to create an excuse to crush humanity. That is the truth, and the truth is all that matters. The chamber was absolutely silent. Morrison could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Everything he had worked for, everything humanity had struggled toward, came down to this moment. Zethros stared at the screen for a long time. Then he looked at Morrison. The Council will recess, he said. We will examine this evidence and determine how to proceed. It was not a victory, not yet, but it was not a defeat either. Morrison stepped down from the archive platform and walked back toward the petitioner's position. As he passed through the gallery, he noticed something different in the way the aliens looked at him. Before, they had stared at him with contempt or indifference. Now there was something else in their eyes. fear, respect, uncertainty. The smallest species in the galaxy had just shown its teeth, and everyone was wondering what else humanity might be hiding. The recess lasted 4 hours. Morrison was escorted to a small waiting room adjacent to the grand chamber. The room was comfortable enough, with soft chairs and a table stocked with food and water. But the door was locked and 2 Synthera guards stood outside. He was not a prisoner exactly, but he was not free to leave either. He sat down and poured himself a glass of water. His hands were steady, but inside his heart was racing. He had played his cards well. He had exposed the truth, but he knew that truth was not always enough. The council could still choose to ignore the evidence. They could still find ways to punish humanity. Politics often won over justice. The first visitor arrived an hour into the recess. She was Velthari, her scales shifting through soft shades of purple and gold. Morrison recognized her from the chamber. She had spoken in defense of her people's censor logs. Her name was Ambassador Yeth, and she was one of the most powerful voices in the Velthari Trade Coalition. "May I sit?" she asked. Morrison gestured to the chair across from him. "Please?" Yeth settled into the chair, her body adjusting to its shape. Her eyes studied Morrison with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You surprised us today," she said. "All of us. We did not expect a human to be so prepared. We have had 40 years to learn how this galaxy works." "Yes, so it seems." She paused. "I came to make you an offer." Morrison waited. "The Velthari have no quarrel with humanity. We are traders. We care only about profit. But the situation in the chamber is complicated. Many species are frightened by what you revealed today. They will look for ways to protect themselves. And your offer? An alliance. The Velthari will support humanity's cause in the Council. In exchange, you will share some of the intelligence you have gathered. Nothing harmful, just enough to help us in our own negotiations." Morrison considered the offer. It was tempting. Velthari's support could make a real difference. But he also understood what she was really asking. She wanted to know how much humanity knew about the Velthari. She wanted to know if there were secrets in those files that could hurt her people. "I appreciate the offer," he said carefully, "but I cannot make deals on behalf of humanity. I am just one man." Yeth smiled. Her teeth were small and sharp. "You are the man who stood before the full council and proved them wrong. You speak for your species whether you want to or not." She left without waiting for an answer. The second visitor arrived 30 minutes later. He was Kathrani, short and broad, his body covered in jewelry that clinked softly as he moved. His name was Merchant Prince Velkoth, and he controlled one of the largest trading fleets in the galaxy. "Impressive display in there," Velkoth said. He did not ask to sit. He simply stood in the center of the room looking at Morrison with calculating eyes. "You must understand the position you have put us all in." I told the truth. "Yes. And truth is a dangerous thing." Velkoth clasped his jeweled hands together. "The Dominari will not forget what you did today. They are a proud people. Humiliating them in front of the entire galaxy will have consequences." "Are you threatening me?" "I am warning you. The Kathrani do not take sides in political disputes, but we do observe. And what I observed today was a young species making powerful enemies. You may have won this battle, but the war is just beginning." He left without another word. The third visitor was not expected. Commander Kreth pushed through the door, shoving aside the Synthera guards with his massive arms. His scales were dark with rage, his 4 hands clenched into fists. He crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed Morrison by the throat, lifting him off the ground. "You think you have won?" Kreth snarled. "You think your little performance changes anything?" Morrison could not breathe. He clawed at Kreth's hand, but the Dominari's grip was like iron. Spots danced before his eyes. "Humanity is nothing," Kreth continued. "You are insects, parasites. You have no place in this galaxy, and when this is over, I will personally ensure that your entire species pays for what you have done today." The Synthera guards finally intervened, pulling Kreth away from Morrison. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. His throat felt like it was on fire. Kreth was dragged toward the door, still shouting, "This is not over. Do you hear me? This is not over." The door slammed shut. Morrison lay on the floor for a long time, catching his breath. His throat was bruised. It hurt to swallow, but he was alive. A medical officer came to check on him. A human, surprisingly. A young woman named Dr. Chen, who worked at the human embassy on Nexus Prime. She examined his throat and gave him something for the pain. "You should file a complaint," she said. "What he did was assault. There are laws." Morrison shook his head. "It would not matter. He is a Dominari commander. I am a human petitioner. The council would never act against him." Dr. Chen looked at him with sad eyes. "Is this what it means to be human in this galaxy? To be attacked and have no recourse?" "For now," Morrison said, "but not forever." The fourth visitor arrived just before the recess ended. He was Dominari, but old, very old. His scales had faded to almost white, and he moved slowly, carefully, like a man made of glass. It took Morrison a moment to recognize him. "High Arbiter Zethros." "May I?" Zethros asked, gesturing to the chair Yeth had used earlier. Morrison nodded, still rubbing his bruised throat. Zethros sat down with a sigh. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at Morrison with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. "I was already alive when your species was still building pyramids," Zethros said finally. "I have watched countless young races join the galactic community. Most of them faded away. A few survived. Even fewer thrived. What is your point?" "My point is that I have seen this before. A young species, full of ambition, convinced that they are special. They push too hard, too fast. They make enemies they cannot defeat. And then they are gone, forgotten, a footnote in the archives." Morrison met the old Dominari's gaze. "Is that a warning?" "It is an observation." Zethros paused. "What you revealed today was unexpected. I will admit that I was not aware of Commander Kreth's involvement in the Kepler 442 incident, but his actions do not represent all Dominari, and the evidence you presented does not change the fundamental reality, which is, humanity is young, humanity is weak, and the galaxy is vast and old and full of dangers you cannot imagine. You won a battle today. Perhaps you even saved your species from immediate destruction, but the forces that wanted to see humanity contained have not disappeared. They have simply become more careful." Zethros rose from his chair. His old bones cracked as he straightened. "I tell you this because I believe in fairness. The Council will reconvene shortly. The charges against humanity will be suspended. You will be granted speaking status. But do not think this means you are safe. There are many in this galaxy who will never accept humanity as equals, and they have very long memories." He walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing. The intelligence you have gathered, the secrets you hinted at. I would advise you to be very careful with that knowledge. Information is power, but power invites attack. And there are some secrets in this galaxy that certain parties would kill to protect." He left without waiting for a response. Morrison sat alone in the quiet room. His throat ached. His body was exhausted, but his mind was racing. Zethros had just told him that even victory came with a price. The galaxy was watching humanity now, and some of what they saw frightened them. Fear could lead to caution, but it could also lead to desperate action. The door opened. A Synthra guard stepped inside. "The council is reconvening. You are requested in the chamber." Morrison stood up slowly. He straightened his uniform and touched the bruises on his throat. They would heal. Everything healed given enough time. He walked toward the door, toward the chamber, toward whatever came next. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it was capable of. Now it was time to see how the galaxy would respond. The grand chamber felt different when Morrison re-entered. The crowds were still there. Thousands of beings from every corner of the galaxy. But the atmosphere had changed. Before the recess, the chamber had been filled with righteous anger directed at humanity. Now there was uncertainty, tension. The comfortable certainty of the elder races had been shaken. Morrison walked to the petitioner's platform and took his position. His throat still hurt from Kreth's attack, but he kept his expression calm. He had learned long ago that showing weakness in front of predators only invited more attacks. High Arbiter Zethros called the assembly to order. His voice echoed through the vast space, commanding silence without effort. "The council has reviewed the evidence presented by the petitioner," Zethros announced. "The sensor logs from the human vessel Curiosity have been verified by independent analysis. The Velthari records have been confirmed. The communication logs from the Dominari outpost have been examined. He paused. The chamber was absolutely silent. Based on this review, the Council finds that the destruction of the Kepler 442 installation was not caused by human action. The charges against humanity are hereby suspended, pending further investigation into the true cause of the incident. A murmur ran through the gallery. Morrison kept his face neutral, but inside he felt something loosen in his chest. Suspended was not dismissed, but it was enough, for now. Furthermore, Zethros continued, Commander Kreth of the Dominari military has been detained for questioning regarding his role in the incident and his assault on the petitioner during the recess. His fate will be determined by Dominari authorities in consultation with this council. Morrison glanced toward where Kreth had been sitting. His seat was empty. Somewhere in the depths of Nexus Prime, the commander was learning that even Dominari officers were not above the law, at least not when their actions embarrassed their own government in front of the entire galaxy. Zethros raised one of his forearms. There is one final matter to address. The chamber grew even quieter, if that was possible. For 40 years, humanity has held observer status in the galactic community. They have been permitted to watch and listen, but not to speak or vote. The events of today have demonstrated that humanity possesses capabilities and resources that were not previously known to this council. Morrison felt his heart beating faster. Therefore, by a vote of 8-4, the council has decided to elevate humanity to provisional speaking status. Human representatives will be permitted to address this body on matters that affect their species. They will not yet have voting rights, but their voice will be heard. The murmur became a roar. Some delegates were shouting in protest. Others were calling for clarification. A few were actually applauding. Morrison saw the Velthari ambassador watching him with something that might have been approval. The Kathrani merchant prince had a calculating smile on his face. Zethros waited for the noise to die down. When it did not, he simply continued speaking, his voice cutting through the chaos. This session is adjourned. The petitioner is free to leave. That was it. No ceremony, no congratulations. Just a simple statement and a dismissal. Morrison stepped down from the platform and began walking toward the exit. The crowd parted for him. Not out of contempt this time. They simply moved aside, making way. Some of them met his eyes as he passed. A Velthari trader nodded slightly. A Kathrani merchant stepped back with exaggerated courtesy. A young Dominari, barely more than a child, stared at him with wide eyes full of wonder. Morrison reached the doors and stepped out into the corridor beyond. The noise of the chamber faded behind him as the doors closed. He stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the reality of what had happened sink in. A figure approached him. Human. A young man in the uniform of the Human Stellar Authority. His name tag read, Lieutenant Park. Mr. Morrison, I have been assigned to escort you back to Earth. Your transport is waiting. Morrison nodded. Thank you, Lieutenant. They walked together through the corridors of Nexus Prime. The station seemed different now. The aliens they passed did not look away. They watched Morrison with curiosity, with interest, with something that might have been respect. Sir, Lieutenant Park said quietly, if you do not mind me asking, what happens now? Morrison thought about the question. He thought about Zethros' warning. He thought about Kreth's threat. He thought about the intelligence files sitting in human databases, secrets that could shake the foundations of galactic politics. Now we do what we have always done, he said. We survive, we watch, we learn, and we wait. Wait for what? For the right moment, for the galaxy to be ready to see us as equals. It might take years, it might take generations, but it will happen. They reached the docking bay where a human transport was waiting. The ship was small compared to the massive alien vessels that filled the other berths, but it was human. It was home. Before boarding, Morrison turned to look back at Nexus Prime. The station stretched out behind him, a vast complex of metal and glass, the heart of galactic civilization. Somewhere in there, trillions of credits changed hands every day. Alliances were formed and broken. Wars were planned and prevented. The fate of entire species was decided in quiet rooms and crowded chambers, and now humanity had a voice in those decisions. A small voice, a new voice, but a voice nonetheless. An older woman was waiting for him at the top of the boarding ramp. She wore the insignia of the Human Stellar Authority's diplomatic corps. Morrison recognized her as Ambassador Chen, one of the senior human officials on Nexus Prime. "That was quite a performance," she said. "The entire galaxy is talking about you." "I just told the truth. Sometimes that is the hardest thing to do." She paused. "The Authority wants to debrief you when you get back to Earth. The United Nations wants to give you a medal. And I have had 17 interview requests in the last hour alone." Morrison shook his head. "Tell them I am just an old man who got lucky. Tell them the real work is just beginning." "What should I tell them that work involves?" Morrison looked back one more time at the station, at the galaxy that had ignored humanity for so long and was now forced to pay attention. "Tell them we need to be ready. The galaxy has seen what we can do when we are backed into a corner. Now they need to see what we can do when we are given room to grow. We need to build. We need to learn. We need to become strong, not through weapons or threats, but through knowledge and patience, and the willingness to do the right thing even when it costs us." He turned and walked up the ramp into the ship. "The galaxy held its breath today," he said over his shoulder. "They were waiting to see what humanity would do. Well, now they know. We do not conquer. We do not destroy. We do not give up. We survive. We grow. And we never forget who we are." The ramp closed behind him. The transport's engines hummed to life. Through the viewport, Morrison watched Nexus Prime shrink as the ship pulled away. He was 73 years old. His career had spanned 4 decades of disappointment and small victories. He had spent his entire life being ignored and dismissed and treated as less than equal. But today, for the first time, the galaxy had listened. And that was just the beginning. The transport jumped to faster than light speed, and the stars stretched into lines of light. Morrison sat back in his seat and closed his eyes. There would be more challenges ahead, more enemies to face, more battles to fight. But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Humanity had taken its first real step toward equality among the stars. The journey was far from over, but the journey had begun, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again.